Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mount Olive Baptist Church's Wednesday night Bible study series for Black History Month. Our series has been entitled Reclaiming Our Story. Reclaiming Our Story. And so we are so excited to continue in our journey of our family research and reclaiming our stories and finding out more about who we are and how we came to be, and more about those that we are so deeply connected to. So I invite everyone to get comfortable, and welcome to those who are joining us via Facebook and YouTube. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to write them in the chat. I will be checking periodically, and I'll check after this broadcast is over. So don't feel like it's too late for you to put your question in the chat. It's not too late. Please ask your question and we will respond as best as we are able to. And for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, I ask that you would let us know if you have any questions. Use the reaction button to raise your hand or write your question in the chat. And if you're not speaking, please keep your microphone on mute so that we can hear everyone clearly. With that being said, if you did not receive an email from us with the weekly assignment last week, that means you have not yet subscribed to our email list. So please go on our website to www.mtolivebc.org to subscribe. Scroll down to the bottom where it says connect with us and fill out your information so that you can stay connected. We want to make sure you're connected and you're really journeying with us for this month. With all of that being said, I just want us to take a moment to center ourselves and to prepare ourselves for what we're about to learn and what we're about to receive during our time together. So won't you posture yourself for a moment of just centering and meditation and prayer. I'm going to read a meditation out of the African Prayer Book by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It is entitled, Deliver Me. Deliver me from the cowardice that dare not face new truths. Deliver me from the laziness that is contented with half-truths. Deliver me from the arrogance that thinks it knows all truth. Deliver me. Good Lord, deliver me. Amen. Amen. We pray for deliverance and we pray for freedom to just be open to all that God is sharing with us and trying to reveal to us in this season as we are learning more about our stories and gaining strength from our stories. And so without further ado, we have Miss Adrienne Abiodun, who is back with us to lead us in this journey of recentering and reclaiming our story. So Miss Adrienne Abiodun, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here with us for another evening.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure, and I am excited to get started. I know this week's topic of documentary research and the overcoming the 1870 brick wall is an area of a lot of interest, and I hope that we'll be able to learn a few things together. And with that being said, before I share my screen, I would love it if some of the participants would just drop into the comments or the chat how far back they've been able to get on their one line, the furthest back they've been able to get. So if it's been past 1870, what year is that the ancestor was born, per se, okay? So just leave that in the chat, and then we'll come back to that later on after I've done the presentation. And I'm going to share my screen with you now. Okay. Again, the presentation I'm giving to you guys comes from a presentation I give often on the state of African American genealogy and Reconstruction era. Many of us have been doing family research for several years, decades maybe, And family research has evolved quite a bit. So that's why I call it the new Reconstruction era. We have more tools available to us, more records available to us, and it's still happening. They're still coming. Okay. Okay, we're going to talk about overcoming brick walls tonight, specifically the 1870 brick wall, which is where in African American genealogy, a lot of family historians tend to get stuck. And the reason for that is in 1870 was the first census where African Americans were recorded by their names. Prior to that, unless they were free people of color, or they would have been recorded by their name in 1860 and 1850. But if they were enslaved people, they would not have been recorded by name on census records. However, you can find their names. Three things to keep in mind. It's going to take a lot of planning, a lot of perseverance, and a lot of patience, probably more patience than any of the other things there. These are brick walls for a reason, and we need to understand the dynamics of the time frame and the complexity of the research. And again, my favorite word is collaboration in this. The family research takes a lot of collaboration, kind of working with those that we're collaborating with. And I think when we start talking about some of these records, we'll talk more about like what I mean about that. I first want to touch on, before we look at the records, the common research misconceptions versus the actual challenges. We talked about this a little bit before, but again, I like concepts when it comes to research more than the actual research or the records, because this is where I find in my professional work, I'm having to overcome these challenges for my clients. And those are further down at the bottom, but the misconceptions at this point is that, again, all African American people were enslaved, and that's not true. There were several communities of free people of color scattered across the United States. And then there's if they were enslaved prior to the proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation, their names were not documented. That is not necessarily true as well. And finding African ancestors by name or place of origin isn't possible. It's possible, but it is very difficult. I don't want to sell you any dreams that we're all going to get there, because we probably won't. But you can, and you can at least turn over stone in your pursuit to getting there. And that's what we really want to know, are the resources and how do we approach these complex questions in this 1870 brick wall. Another one I've come across is when enslaved individuals were treated well by their enslavers, it was because they were related. That I don't know why, he was kind and and my ancestor didn't have to work in the field. They worked in the house, and he was fair skinned. So the enslaver was the father or something. That comes up a lot, and that's not necessarily true. And that feeds into the next one. But the actual challenges are that for individuals, including myself, no family history was passed down. And so to get this far, we get questions like, well, how do I found my ancestor in 1870, but I can't find them in 1860. So we make the assumption that if they were not recorded by name in 1860, they were enslaved, or could be other things. Maybe they weren't. Maybe they were looking in the wrong place, location. Maybe we're looking for the wrong name. Like maybe they changed their name. These are complex scenarios here. And that's what I was telling Reverend Miracle Worrell Neosi, that giving a presentation like this is difficult because each and every one of you is going to have such a different hurdle to overcome in your own research. But let's see, I'm gonna go back to that, sorry. The other one is keeping an open mind and overcoming our own personal biases. I had a client who hired me and spent a lot of money to do it, to do his research, told me when I said, this is where we're going with this. This is the direction I'm seeing. He said, well, I'm going to have a hard time believing that because, so-and-so told me this information and they could have been killed for sharing that information. And he was right. What he was saying was that his great-grandfather was the child of a white person. And this is post-emancipation. And yeah, I don't know how that family narrative came into play, but it wasn't accurate. And so once he saw the research, he was willing to accept that there was a record that was actually missed. It was a marriage record that kind of smoothed things out for him. But also we're reconciling areas of trauma and grief and pain. If you have families with mixed race individuals or European heritage, you may have come across people in your research that you need to collaborate with, but aren't necessarily willing to move forward yet. And that might be because they are embarrassed that their relatives were enslavers. They don't want to acknowledge that maybe they benefited and their privilege and that their family did well because of that. Or they might just not want to acknowledge, some people, it's like, we're just going to forget about it and move on. And that's nice. But my history is still locked up in that whole, we're just going to move on. And I can't take my lineage further back. So we have to work and collaborate with these types of individuals who are, let's just forget about it and move on. I'm not my ancestor. That's too painful to talk about. I don't want people to know that. And that's on both sides. I don't really want to talk about my ancestors being enslaved people. I typically find people who descend from free people of color usually know that. That is information and stories that are told over and over in the family because there's a sense of pride there, even though that came with its own complications and being free per se was not always, that they could do whatever they wanted to. Okay, records and location. For this presentation tonight, we're going to talk about a few record types listed there: the wills and probate records, deed books, Freedmen's Bureau records, military records and pension records, and newspapers. Last week, I told you where you could access the other records. Same thing applies here for some of these, but not all. Offline, this is where we start to get a lot more offline heavy. Courthouses, for wills and probate records. These are not all digitized, even though there are a lot online. Deed books for sure are probably in courthouses. You're going to need to go there. And the Freedmen's Bureau records are online. Military records and pension records, a lot of them can be found on Fold 3, but you may have to order some from the National Archives as well. And newspapers, these are the records that I have found the most success with identifying people prior to 1870. Okay, wills and probate records. We're going to look first at a probate of my fourth great grandmother, Matilda Terry Scott. Okay, regrettably, Matilda Terry Scott was a very wealthy, and her husband were very wealthy planters in Jefferson County, Mississippi. And they enslaved several people. When Matilda Terry Scott died in 1857, this was the probate, a portion of her probate record that we are looking at. And what you'll see there are blocks of names with their value listed and who these are going to. So I'm sharing this in the reverse because as an African-American person, essentially your ancestor could be listed in this record, correct? I am not related to any of the individuals in the inventory as far as I am aware, but if I were related to Emily, who is age 19, valued at $1,450, and is being gifted to Alice Scott, a 2-year-old. If I was Emily's descendant, I would have had to have heard through family history that the family had been enslaved by Matilda Terry Scott in order to pursue this record. Because right now this record is on Ancestry.com and it's on other websites, but the only name that is indexed is the enslaver. So all of these names that appear here are not indexed. This is something that Ancestry, I'm aware, has taken up recently to fix, because it has been a great disservice for African American people to know that wills are available, probate records are available for enslavers who enslaved people prior to emancipation and then either passed away, but their names aren't digitized. Their names are not available. So this is one of those, be patient. If you are on Ancestry, check back if you're not there yet. And sometime in the future, probably in the next, I would say 2 years max, they hope to have indexed all of these names. So if you're an individual who grew up hearing that family history and or not hearing it, but like the family structure that, Emily had a sister named Jane and a little brother named Joe, and you grew up knowing that structure, but you didn't know who their enslaver was. When these things are indexed, you will then be able to put Emily in her last name and then some of her other family members and hopefully come across this record to locate her in this record. Another thing I want to point out about some of these records, we want records to take our lines further back, but sometimes they don't do that. Sometimes they strictly just paint the picture for us of what was happening and really make their story more robust. So that's where I say that in itself is part of your success. Do not feel discouraged if you're not able to build the whole family further back in time, because some of us will be able to, some of us won't. In this probate record, we have another inventory, and inventories are probably the best part of the wills and the probate records. People will approach a probate record, they'll look at the will, and sometimes it will say, I give to my son all my Negro males, or something like that, but it won't name them, or maybe it'll name a few. But the inventories, especially if you're dealing with enslavers who owned a lot of people, that's really the meat of the probate record. So you really want to pay attention to that. And this particular record is one that was inherited research from me. My branch family line did a lot of work prior to this record. Is still not online as far as I'm aware. It's located in a courthouse in Wilkinson County, Mississippi. And years ago, they did the work because these were relatives of mine that stayed near Mississippi and Louisiana, and they heard this over and over and over again. Our ancestor, Philip Branch, Emily Branch, and all of their children were enslaved by John Whitaker. He was the enslaver. They knew that. John Whitaker brought them from North Carolina into Wilkinson County, Mississippi. And so they knew who they were looking for when they went into that courthouse to find this record. It wasn't an easy record to find. It was in a file cabinet on the 3rd floor. When I went to retrace their steps, if they hadn't have told me where it was, I would have been in there for weeks looking for this record. But some things I want to point out in this type of research as we are trying to build the family backwards in time, find out who Philip's parents are, which in this case, the oral history said that John Whitaker was his half brother, his enslaver was his half brother, and his enslaver's father was also Philip Branch's father, because Philip was he was a carriage driver for the family. So he was treated nice, he was treated well. He was fair and biracial, and that's on census records as well, that you see documented as a mulatto or whatnot. But later on, and this is where I talk about the complexity of stuff, in that blue box you'll see there's another family right after Philip Branch's family, and the individual there, his name is Butler. You can see nobody here has last names, so we really don't know what they're going by unless we see them on the 1870 census as a family set. In this case, the individuals in red are last name Branch. The family in blue has the last name Mitchell. Now, this is all, and this is why we revisit these records. If you have a record like this, go back to it. Look at all the names again and just, look at them. When I asked the family about this later on, and I said, did you know that Butler Mitchell is related to us, like that family down there? And they said, no. I said, well, did you get all the names and all the pages? And they said, no, we were just excited that we found them on this page, that they only copied that page. And that's why I had to go back and retrace their steps, because I wanted to see all the names in this probate record. It wasn't until I took a DNA test and my family members took a DNA test and other Branch members of the family took DNA tests that we found out we were related to the Butler Mitchell family in that blue block right there. So there's probably other people on this page that we're related to. They may not have the last name Branch and they may not have the last name Mitchell. But this is how we really start to understand the story and building the family backwards in further back in time. Now, another thing we found out through DNA testing in conjunction with this record and family oral history was that the Whitaker name, which they had built the tree back many generations based off of this oral history, that John Whitaker was the father of, or the brother of Philip Branch, and his father, Eli Benson Whitaker, was their father. We found out through DNA testing that that was inaccurate. Philip's father was a white man, but he would have the last name Fletcher. And those Fletchers that he was connected to all come from a Quaker family in Perquimans County, North Carolina. Well, we were told that Philip came from Halifax County, North Carolina. These are not super far from one another, but there's some gaps, there's some holes in the story here, and it's much more complex than the family ever imagined. Luckily for me, when I came babbling about DNA, they were very receptive to wanting to know the facts, like who was Philip's father. But again, if we're just looking at documentary evidence and you have gotten far enough to know who the enslaver is and that enslaver died prior to emancipation, you should look into obtaining their will or probate record, and that may not be online. It may be in a courthouse somewhere. This is the will of the Fletcher male that I came across. And now, because I took the DNA test, it allowed me to continue to pursue research when research had come to a halt. So again, I don't want to just DNA, but if we're trying to open up avenues for research and overcome brick walls, it would be a disservice for me not to mention it. Once I took the test and I had my cousins take this test and they were seeing they were matching all these Fletchers from Perquimans County, I went to Perquimans County, and I think I'm saying that right, North Carolina, and I did some research on this Fletcher family, but I found this one so interesting because this was in 1826 for William Fletcher, and he is setting all his enslaved individuals free because as a Quaker, he wasn't supposed to be involved in enslaving people. And in here, he says he's like for them to embark for Liberia in Africa or Haiti or any free state that they choose to go to. So if I'm looking for these relatives of mine and I want to find all their siblings and find their parents, this is good information to know. If these people took off to Liberia or Haiti or some other state, I mean, I've got a lot of different places. My family, you know, if there's the connection to William Fletcher, may have gone. So just food for thought with that. Deed books. Just so we're all on the same page, these are legal documents reflecting the transfer of property ownership and land, and they may contain the following documents in some of these deed books: wills, mortgages, leases, powers of attorney, indentures, manumission of slaves, and tax lists. I've had cousins who were very successful in finding manumission records. And these are records where enslaved people were granted their freedom from their enslavers. So those types of records can be found usually at courthouses and deed books or at archives. The records we came across, my cousins, were at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. And I can't say that they were handled very well because, again, it was kind of happenstance that they even found them. So patience, patience when searching for these, when going to look offline for records, if they're not on microfilm and if they're not digitized, you're going to need patience leafing through these. Freedmen's Bureau records. The Freedmen's Bureau was created after the Civil War for free people to document marriages, banking purposes, for disputes with the contracts. Many of the formerly enslaved entered into contracts with their previous enslaver or maybe someone nearby, and that was for them to start getting paid, right? And not work for free. So these are just a small sample of some of the Freedmen's Bureau types of records that exist within this collection. And they have done their due diligence. There's still a lot more work with indexing the names of these records. So for example, this is a marriage record. It's an index entry of, or it's an entry record of various records that have happened, marriages that have happened. It's not the actual marriage record. But in that line in block in red, we see Robert Greene, who married Susan Dandridge. And this is the record I spoke of the previous week that named her race as a griff. And I had never seen that. But if you look on this page, you'll see that there are other people that have that racial designation as well. And that was something in Southwest Mississippi, Delta and Louisiana area that they would use to, a term they would use to describe a person based off of their racial mix or how they believed they were racially mixed based off of their complexion. This is a bank record from the Freedmen's Bureau. On this record, and what's great about the bank records is that it usually will list children of the applicant. It will also list their parents, whether they're living, whether they're deceased. So these records are particularly nice if you're trying to go maybe a generation back in time. Again, this family in the yellow block here comes from my Henderson family, which is on my paternal side. Very large family, a lot of family history that was always passed down. And this is our guy that we're kind of stuck with. Hardy Henderson is the furthest back. We can trace that line. With my personal research, I have found nothing but muddying the research. The more I dig, the muddier it gets, right? You know, I get something like this and I get really excited because it says, and we would consider this direct evidence in a sense that Anderson Henderson is the son of Hardy Henderson, because he stated that on his bank record for the Freedmen's Bureau. And we'll talk about that a little bit more further down. says his dad is George, his mother is Virginia, and that's for Hardy Henderson. This is an agreement with freedmen. This is the planter, Burwell Scott, a former enslaver. Now he has to enter into these contracts with the formerly enslaved people, and he has done that. So with some of these documents, you really have to pay attention and look closely, because those names are all in this block here. And once again, they don't all have the same last name. You see Millers, you see Diggs, Braxtons. We looked at one of his records, I think, earlier. And with these families, again, DNA testing has shown that there is a relationship between these families, even though they have different last names. So labor contracts might have a whole group, a whole family set listed there. You might recognize one or two of your own ancestors, but keep in mind that some of those other people with those different last names may also be related. Okay, military records, another, and this is probably my favorite source, because I think they're handled a little bit better than, or they've just existed and been indexed and touched a little bit more than the Freedmen's Bureau. So with military records, people sometimes ask, well, how do I know my ancestor was in the military? Usually that's family history too, that was passed down. They fought in the war, they were on the Union side, they were a colored troop, they were a Buffalo soldier. Those are the types of things people will hear in their family history getting passed down. In this sense, this is Alex Jones. He is another fourth great grandfather for me. Pretty much all my relatives at this time frame will be third or fourth great grandparents. But Alex Jones fought as a private. He wasn't a U.S. colored troop, but he was a scout for a spy, a Union spy who was in the Natchez southwest corner of Mississippi area. So that's him listed there. And this was a 1890 veteran schedule. So this was a special census that was taken on anyone who fought in the war. And they also have these for Confederate soldiers, but it gives you some information there that you can use to pursue their other military records. Again, how do I know if my ancestor fought in a war or was in the military? If you haven't gotten yourself that far back yet, the 1910 census is a good starting place. On this census, in column 30, on that left-hand side where you see that big block, in column 30, it asks if they've served in the military. If they have, there'll be a little tick mark there. And you can use that and look at their age to kind of determine what war they might have fought in and what records you might want to pursue. So if you haven't gotten to 1870, you don't know if your ancestor participated in the Civil War or any war for that matter, the 1910 census gives good clues. And in the case of Hardy Henderson, who did serve in the U.S. colored troops, if you look at the 1910 census for him, it doesn't have a check mark. So even that is not always foolproof. The absence of something doesn't necessarily mean it completely didn't exist. It just may have been missed on that by that census enumerator. And muster roll cards, draft registrations, index pension entries, all of these are great records to use to pursue or to look for and determine, did my ancestor have a pension record that I can try to obtain from the archives. Alexander Branch did, Hardy Henderson did, Horace Whitney did. The outcomes for all of these men in those pension files were very different. Horace Whitney listed there, who had an alias of Thompson, was deemed a deserter who didn't come back, and he did not get his pension. sadly. Alexander Branch did, Hardy Henderson did. And again, the Alexander Branch he's the son of that Philip Branch. And so again, inherited research for me, but we're going to talk a little bit about Hardy Henderson's pension file. Myself and 2 other cousins ordered this pension record probably about like 6 years ago now, 5, 6 years ago. And in this, we were hoping to learn more about his parents, more about his family, and whatnot. We had to request this record from the National Archives. And once we got it, it was about 98 pages, I believe. Now, all of those pages did not provide genealogical information that I would be interested. A lot of them were testimonies about his health, wounds in service, and ailments as he's getting older, and neighbors that say, yes, I know him, or no, or mostly, yes, I know him, affidavits, right? So there were 3 pages, I think, out of the 98 that did have information about his family, and those were the ones I wanted. Everything else was fun to look at, but I really wanted to know about his family, because previously I had seen Hardy Henderson on his Freedmen's Bureau bank record, and now I see this pension record that details his service and his family. On that bank record, it said he had a son named Anderson. But what happened here, once I opened this can of worms and got his pension record, I saw all of these other children listed here, and it may be very difficult to read, but these are Hardy's other children. But there's no Anderson Henderson here. So what happened to Anderson? Why isn't he here? He was definitely living at the time of this record. This record was created, so his absence is kind of bothersome. But then also we learned about Hardy's marriage to Susan. He tells us that Susan was previously married to a Robert Green, and that is how I was able to find Susan Dandridge and Robert Green in the Freedmen's Bureau marriage records. I did not know that. I did not know her maiden name. I did not know she had been previously married. He talked about Robert Green. She was a war widow, and that Robert Green had died of disease, I think, in Vicksburg. It also tells us where he was born. He was born in Nashville. So these pension records are a treasure, like trove of information if your ancestor served and filed for a pension. And it may not have been the person who served, the soldier. It may have been his spouse, and they may have done a widow's pension, which also has a lot of information as well. So yeah, this is that record here, one of those other pages where it shows the information about Susan, about his children, and we can compare these with those other documents that are giving us information we could not see on the 1870 census, that are helping us build out the family a little bit more. Okay, these are all of Hardy and Susan's children. This is where they got married. Susan was a war widow. I'm not going that much further back in time yet, but these are all great clues, because now the question is for me, because I come from this Anderson Henderson, who was Anderson's father if it's not Hardy? If Hardy's not claiming Anderson in this record, why is that? Is he was an adopted child? Is he even really the son of Susan? Was he the son of Susan and her first husband, Robert Green? In this, it also said that Robert Green, where his place of birth, that he was from Virginia serving, but then he died in Vicksburg, right? That's important to know, because if I'm trying to find and determine, is Anderson Henderson the son of Hardy, or is he the son of Robert? Knowing that Robert came from Virginia and Susan was maiden name Dandridge, those are things I'm going to be looking for in records. Those are things I'm going to be looking for in the family trees of my DNA matches. Newspapers are also great. Again, if you have a cluster of people that you know of, that my family had Uncle Bob and his brother, Fred, and another brother and a sister named Mary, and a sister, and hopefully there's a unique name in there, because otherwise if you have like really common names, it's probably going to be hard leafing through newspapers. But as you can see, all of these papers were before 1870, minus the one where it's saying Bill Epps, the good old colored man of Yazoo City, was stricken with something like heart disease on Main Street, and Main Street Saturday evening last. That one was after 1870, but the one in 1819, the trustees fell. If you know who the enslaver was, and in this case, George Layton is my fifth great grandfather, another prominent enslaver in Southwest Mississippi, him and his wife. There were several news articles when he passed in detailing his property. It points to the deed book in this one. It says that there's inventory and records in these deed books. So if I wanted to go and look for those in Jefferson County, I would, try to find those books. But then it also names the following slaves by names or enslaved people. So newspapers can be a great source, but you really have to have some clues already to pursue these types of things. Otherwise, you can just be scrolling and leafing through quite blindly and without really any good direction. So that's it. We're gonna pause. I think that I want to have time for questions, and I want to look at how far back some of you have gotten. And then I don't mind answering or looking at like some of your unique challenges. I'd be interested to hear. I'm going to open up the floor, and I'm going to ask Reverend Worrell Nielski to help me out with the questions or feedback.
Absolutely. So did you want to start with, I guess after you finish sharing your screen, there you go. Did you want to start with some of the comments in the chat, or you want to go to questions first?
Well, let's look at the comments in the chat. Like I'm looking at, somebody has gone all the way back to 1796. That's my Philip Branch was born in 1795, and he's my fourth great grandfather as well. That's Elora Kilgore. And then what else? 1865 in Tennessee. 1826. So pretty far back. Like, okay, so now any questions or research challenges or questions about the records that you may have, some of the records, or whether you've been able to utilize any of those records?
So, and there was one other comment that I think someone mistakenly sent it directly to me, but someone was able to go back to 1853.
Okay.
They found that a family member was the first colored school teacher in Arlington County, Virginia, and they were able to go back to 1840 as well. So that was insightful. So thank you all who shared that. And if you have a question, you can feel free to look at the bottom of your screen, push the reaction button, and click raise hand so that you'll pop up at the top of our screen. And if you're having challenges doing that, if you have your video camera on, we'll see you waving if you wave. So Brother Jonathan McMullen, feel free to go ahead and share.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for the great presentation. I was able to go back to 1826, but an interesting thing that kept popping up, and all of those relatives, it all said that their points of birth was South Carolina. Is that an anomaly, or is there something else going on here?
So the individual you found, your ancestor, was born in 1826, and their siblings or their children were all born in South Carolina?
No, their children were born in Alabama, Pickens County.
Okay.
However, the elder person was born allegedly in South Carolina, but I also saw South Carolina on others that were close to that same time frame.
Right. Well, that could be completely accurate. I mean, they were close by, and you'd have to look at multiple documents to determine, like, is this accurate? I mean, I had an ancestor who said Alabama, Ohio, and then Mississippi, and Ohio threw me because I'm thinking, no, that's Alabama, Mississippi, maybe, but not Ohio. So with each document, it was not clear. But if you look at multiple documents, and there's a pattern of South Carolina for those individuals, and Alabama for the rest, you can start to build a timeline of where they may have been and where they came from using those births and locations. Yeah, I don't think that is odd at all because they're not too far from each other.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
While other people are thinking of questions, Adrian, I do have a question for you. The only website I've used is ancestry.com. And I know on Ancestry, like there's a way where like my brother is on Ancestry doing research. So if he's already connected with me and he like discover something new, I'll get an email notifying me of like a new connection that I can add and that will help me further my research. Do other websites do that as well, or is it something strictly for ancestry.com?
I cannot say for sure. Like I said, Family Search, which is where you could access a lot of these Freedmen's Bureau records as well. And you could build a tree, which I don't always recommend tree building on their site. I don't know that they send out notifications, like if you've added or connected people. So I cannot speak to that for sure. Like another company, MyHeritage, allows you to build trees and connect records to them as well. But I don't know if they notify family members.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Because also,
go ahead, Brother James.
Because also what we found is that there was another relative, it seems, that got all the way back to the 1700s or 1600s with one of our ancestors. So as I'm going through it, the ironic thing is they have pictures of some of these individuals too. And some of these individuals are like white. And so I'm like, I'm trying to connect the dots on some of it, but it's hard for me to all right, they have the same grandparents, the grandparents are the same, the names are the same. Like Miracle was saying, it starts to connect the dots and the leaves start coming up. So it's the same leaves. So I'm like, okay, should I stop with this person or is this legitimate? Because all of their stuff looks legitimate, but I'm like, I don't know if am I following the right tree down the line? It gets confusing for me with that.
And that it gets confusing for a lot of people using the trees. Like I definitely will never say don't look at family trees, and there are a lot, there's all these family trees and they're wrong and they have the wrong information. We have to remember too, like there are family trees are great for clues, but we have to do our work and trying to find record evidence that makes those connections in those trees make sense. Like for instance, I saw something in a family tree and I'm like, whoa, this person is connected this, and he's taken where I'm stuck, he's taken that, and he has parents and he has grandparents. Where is he getting that information from? And so I would also reach out to them and say, where are you getting this from? I mean, because if it looks good, but you're still hesitant, they might actually have a solid source. So in my case, in my example, it turned out to be a distant cousin of mine who had been to Ireland and had gone to the archives there and found this land dispute record over this land in Mississippi. And he had no idea, his tree stopped where mine picked up. Like I could see he had name. I'm like, these are the same people. And when I asked him, I said, how do you know this? Where is this coming from? He sent me the document, the land dispute, in the court record that was showing that, and it was naming the ancestors of mine and my ancestor and his sibling in this record. And then with that, I felt more comfortable, like going further back and adding his research, because I knew he had done his due diligence. But you really have to try to retrace steps. Like I said, in that one probate record and will, family was so excited. They found this probate record, but they only copied the page that had our ancestors' names on it, not realizing that there were several enslaved people named on that document, and those people could be related too.
Thank you. And there's another question in the chat, and I guess I'll combine it with this question as well. I know a few years ago I did like the DNA test, and so there's a question of, I guess, what resources are there to help us make sense of the results? And do you have like any recommended companies that we go through for those that want to actually do the DNA test?
I always recommend like all of them because they all they have their pros and cons, but depends on the research question, and everybody's gonna have a different research question. I'll say Ancestry usually gets recommended first if you have to only take one, because they have the most DNA tested participants out of all the major DNA testing companies. And because their website has the trees and the records, you're more likely to make sense of your DNA matches that way. Unlike 23andMe, which I love because of the advanced analysis tools, people don't have family tree information. They might list their family surnames and stuff. So on that website, I'm writing to a lot more people and asking them directly for family information. But those two sites I have the most success with. But again, it depends on the question. If you are trying to find out about your father's 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 father, you may need to take a test, that family tree DNA, a Y-DNA test. It would depend on what the question is you want to answer.
Thank you. And there's also a question in the chat, and then we'll go to Sister Janet, about how do we, it lost me. Let's go to Sister Janet, and then I'll read this one. Sister Janet, you can go ahead.
Okay, since I've done 23andMe, and they have built a family tree, but there's no names further down the road. All they do is just like say, okay, this person is in your family tree. And then so I need to know, what side do I put the female on and what side do I put the male on to try to trace? Because I've got several that they say, they're in your family tree, but then there's no mother, no father, no grandmother, no grandfather, that type of thing. How do I do that?
Yeah, I don't use that feature that much. It is confusing for a lot of individuals, because like you've noticed, they don't necessarily have a name of a grandparent or anything. What their algorithm is trying to do is, based off of your DNA, help you understand where an unknown genetic match connects with you. So they're saying, oh, this person, based on the amount of DNA they share, if they're sharing X DNA with you, they are related to you through your mother's mom. And then because you may have cousins that you do know in there, and they can cluster and group, their algorithm is trying to make it easy for you, but it's not easy. It's not easy, especially because, like I said, if you have family, you have double cousins on a side. Like some cousins might belong on your mom and your dad's side. I have those, I have a lot. So it's not always easy for the algorithms and the way those things are working in the background to do that. I don't recommend the average, use the family the family tree feature on 23andMe. It's not your build out all the names and add records type of family tree. So I don't recommend starting with that.
Okay.
Adrian, is there a way to know whether, or I guess, are there any records that would show whether an ancestor born in 1877 was a representative to a particular political party convention?
For that, I would research like journals. So that convention and political party, I would research different books about it and journals and court records or documents or wherever those are located to see if that ancestor's name comes up. So for instance, my branch ancestor, I found this unique kind of find for him, and it was this special election that was occurring in Mississippi because of voter intimidation. And my ancestor, who was a Republican and a police officer, was describing the voter intimidation. And this was early, like just special find in like Google books that I stumbled upon. I can't remember. I think it was the special election of Mississippi and then a year after that. So for House of Representatives or something like that, I would start looking through journals and books and seeing who was listed on the like attendance logs or things like that.
Thank you. Brother Clayton, did you have a quick question? If so, you'll be the last one.
Yeah, well, I tried familysearch.org and the brother that's my 93-year-old brother that's living with me, they had him passed. And so I'm going back to ancestry.com because that just didn't, I don't know how they got it, how they got it, but no, he's back in the bedroom now asleep. That's all I had to say.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. Adrian, did you have any closing comments?
Well, no, I hope that this is helpful. And for the homework for this week, just to touch on that, I had you reviewing the entire page of 2 or 3 different 1870 census records for your ancestors. Again, I hope we're all at 1870, but I certainly understand if you're not. I hope some of you are further than that. And looking at those pages, I want you to consider the relationship of your direct ancestors to the other members in the community. Are these relationships obvious? Are you able to trace them, like those other members, and find connections? Like I said, I found, and really I've only found this because of DNA testing, that on the 1870 census, even 1900 census, all of these other things, all these other family relatives who did not share the same surname as my family. And it's not even because the women married and changed their name. No, it's because I don't know why they had completely different surnames. But just consider that, because the more people you can connect and know are your family members, you create more opportunities to research and try to find more records related to the family. So again, we use those people to say, okay, well, let me try to find records on this person, and maybe it'll tell me who their mom and dad is. So that is why look at the 1870 census if you haven't gotten any like pension records or wills and probates to look at. But then identify online and offline collections, archives, and other repositories where you might locate records about your ancestors prior to 1870, and then determine what challenges are you're unlikely to overcome using traditional research and why that challenge exists. So I hope that some of you will do it, and again, look at these records again. I'm sure there are some very polished researchers in here, but I keep going back to these records every time someone new shows up, and it's like, hey, you're from East Feliciana Parish, Louisiana. I have family from that parish, and let me go back to that record and look at it again. And sure enough, family I wasn't paying attention to is living nearby, my family. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Adrian. Unfortunately, it is time to close. And I see there's a question in the chat, and we'll get to that. But I just want to thank you all so much for joining us this week. Again, if you are not subscribed to our email listing, where you would receive the weekly homework assignments, please go to our church's website, www.mcolivebc.org, to subscribe and click connect with us, and you will be subscribed to receive all of our emails. And we hope that as a result of all of this research and learning, you will come out on Zoom virtually and share with us all that you have been learning at our Black History Month Cafe, which will take place Saturday, February the 26th at 12 noon. And again, you can go to our church's website to register for that and receive the Zoom link. So peace and blessings to all of you. Continue doing the work, be encouraged, and we will see you again next Wednesday at 7 p.m.